My father passed away when I was just 3 years old, leaving only a few pictures and a lone video of him cuddling with me when I was a baby. I never got to know him. Elizabeth here, and this is my tale. It wasn't easy growing up with my mother. She went through men more quickly than I could memorize their names and was constantly terrified to be by herself. The men were like a revolving door, going out as fast as they arrived. My mom's mother, my grandma, was the one constant in my existence. She was my sanctuary, my rock. When things at home were too crazy, which they frequently did, Grandma would step in and take me to her house. She would say, "Come on, Elizabeth," in a soothing, kind voice. "It's time to make some cookies." Spending those weekends at Grandma's was like stepping into another universe. It was always quiet and serene at her house, just Grandma and I making cookies, reading novels, or taking care of her little garden. No strange guys wandering about in the middle of the night. No yelling, no slamming doors. I used to ponder a lot about my dad's origins. I suspected there was more to the tale than Mom telling me they'd lost connections after Dad died because she was disapproving of her moving on so soon. When it came to telling the truth, Mom wasn't exactly trustworthy. My haven was school. I plunged myself into my studies, primarily as a diversion from the mayhem at home, but also because I liked studying. Mom was not really active in my schooling or anything else in my life. I had no choice but to become independent. I was preparing my own food, doing my own washing, and assisting myself with my schoolwork by the time I was 10 years old. Mom wasn't interested in such little matters. She was too busy pursuing her next romance. When I turned 12, everything was different. At last, Mom married a guy named Frank. She was ecstatic and believed that he represented her final opportunity for happiness. "Lizzie, this is it," she said. "We're going to be a real family at last." Frank, though, had other plans. He was quite clear from the beginning that I was a hassle and a reminder of Mom's past that he would want to forget. On the first night he moved in, he hissed at me, saying, "Listen up, kid. Unless it's absolutely essential, I don't want to see or hear you. You remain in your room and move aside from us. You get it." Living under Frank's authority was very different from living in a true family. I soon discovered that my best defenses were quiet and invisibility, since he dominated our home with an iron grip. "Do you really believe you can just take advantage of us?" Frank would growl. "Girl, you're gonna have to earn your keep." And I did deserve it. I was expected to pay back every penny that was spent on me with chores and flawless grades. My grandmother had given me an old Nokia, so I walked about in hand-me-downs while my friends flaunted their new outfits and phones. Why am I not able to own new clothes like everyone else? I asked Mom once, daring to. She shot back with a curt, "We can't afford it, Lizzie. Give thanks for what you already have." However, I was aware of this. I'd noticed the high-end purses. Mom arrived home and learned about Frank's weekend travel plans. Money was there, but not for me. I was the odd man out at school, so I was surprised by how nice my classmates were. They never made fun of my old phone or my out-of-date wardrobe. Rather, they frequently made extra efforts to assist. "Liz, would you like a ride home?" Sarah, a girl in my math class, used to inquire all the time. From the driver's seat, her mother would give me a warm grin, a far cry from the icy shoulder I received back home. Given that the alternative would be a long walk home, I would gladly accept. It was obvious from Mom and Frank's statements that getting me up from school was not a top priority. Frank would ask, "You got 2 legs, don't you? Make use of them." There was no rest at home. Frank always had a to-do list for me to finish, including cooking, cleaning, and washing. God forbade if I attempted to take a break from the labor. It never ceased. What are you doing, in your opinion? If Frank saw me staring at nothing, he would yell. This house needs work done on a constant basis. Perfect homework was expected of me, and Frank would frequently review my grades. Anything that wasn't exceptional wasn't acceptable. One day, he yelled, a B-, and waved my report card in my face. Do you consider that sufficient? Give up watching TV for a week, and don't bother going to your tiny pals. I softly nodded while holding back my emotions. Although the penalties were severe, disagreements just made matters worse. I would thus withdraw to my room, hide my face in my pillow, and cry in private. My weekends spent with Grandma were essential, but even they were in jeopardy. Frank had come up with a new way to punish me, not letting me visit Grandma's place. You didn't pass that history test, he would sneer. It appears that you want to study this weekend at home. When Grandma called, concerned about my absence, I had to lie to her, and it crushed my heart. I would say, attempting to seem happy, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I simply have a ton of schoolwork. I swear I'll be here next weekend." But when the following weekend rolled along, Frank would find some new excuse to keep me at home. I felt unable to halt the vicious loop. I decided as I got closer to being 15 that I wanted some freedom in order to get away from the oppressive control at home. So I went to the neighborhood diner and applied for a job. I was surprised when Frank agreed. He muttered, "It's about time you started contributing." The diner became my sanctuary. The owner, a kind-hearted woman named Marge, took me under her wing. From day one, she was everything my mother wasn't: caring, attentive, and genuinely interested in my life. She'd often let me leave early, especially on weekends. Those stolen hours with Grandma were precious. I'd arrive at her house breathless and grinning, and she'd welcome me with open arms. "Elizabeth, my dear, what a lovely surprise," she'd exclaim, pulling me into a warm hug. I never told Grandma the whole truth about life at home. I couldn't bear to see the worry in her eyes or, worse, risk her confronting Mom and potentially losing my visitation rights altogether. So I kept my struggles to myself, painting a rosier picture than reality. As my 18th birthday approached, a tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, things would change. Perhaps Mom and Frank would finally see me as an adult worthy of respect and kindness. How naive I was. The morning of my 18th birthday, I woke up with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I got dressed carefully, putting on the nicest outfit I owned. A hand-me-down blouse from a cousin and a skirt I'd found at a thrift store. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my room, half expecting balloons or a happy birthday banner. Instead, I was met with Mom's cold stare. "Oh good, you're up," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I have news. I'm pregnant. We'll need your room for the baby. You can go wherever you want, but you can't stay here anymore." I stood there, stunned. Of all the scenarios I'd imagined for my 18th birthday, this hadn't even been on the list. "But this is my home," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes hardened. "This is my house, Elizabeth. You've been a burden on Frank for far too long. I need a calm environment for my pregnancy, and frankly, you stress him out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A burden? A source of stress? Was that all I was to them? Where am I supposed to go? I asked, fighting back tears. Mom shrugged, her indifference like a knife to my heart. "Go live with your grandmother. Get a job. I don't have money for college, so you're on your own there. But I expect you to come back daily to clean the house while Frank's at work. I can't do it in my condition." With that, she thrust a hastily packed bag into my hands and all but pushed me out the door. The lock clicked behind me with chilling finality. I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, trying to process what had just happened. On my 18th birthday, instead of celebration, I'd been discarded like yesterday's trash. I trudged up the familiar path to Grandma's house, my eyes red and puffy from crying. Before I could even knock, the door swung open, and there stood Grandma, her face lighting up at the sight of me. "Elizabeth, happy birthday, my dear," she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm embrace. Then, noticing my tear-stained face and the bag at my feet, her expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I broke down again, sobbing into her shoulder as I recounted the morning's events. Grandma listened, her face a mix of shock and anger. "That girl. I can't believe she'd do this to her own daughter," she muttered, shaking her head. Then, squeezing my shoulders gently, she said, "Well, you're always welcome here, Elizabeth. Always." She ushered me inside, where I was greeted by the mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked cookies, my favorite, chocolate chip ones. "I was hoping you'd stop by today," Grandma said with a wink. "Come on, let's get some food in you." As I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by all my favorite treats, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. Grandma bustled around, pouring me a glass of milk and piling a plate high with cookies, mini sandwiches, and fruit. "Now," she said, sitting across from me, "we're not going to let your mother's foolishness ruin your special day. Why don't you call up some of your friends? We'll have a little party right here in the backyard." Overwhelmed with gratitude, I hugged her tightly before reaching for my phone. Within an hour, several of my classmates had arrived, bearing gifts and warm wishes. The backyard was soon filled with laughter and chatter. The smell of grilling burgers and hot dogs wafted through the air as we played games, shared stories, and simply enjoyed each other's company. For the first time in years, I felt truly celebrated. As the afternoon wore on, I made frequent trips into the house to refill the pitcher of Grandma's famous homemade lemonade. During one such trip, I overheard Grandma on the phone in the living room. "Yes, that's right. It's time," she was saying, her voice low but firm. "I think you should come as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning would be perfect." I paused, curious who she was talking to and what it was time for. But before I could ponder further, I heard her wrapping up the call. "All right, I'll see you then." "Thank you," she said before hanging up. When I entered the living room with the refilled pitcher, Grandma was there, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Having fun, dear?" she asked brightly. I nodded, deciding not to ask about the mysterious phone call. Whatever it was, I trusted Grandma. After all, she was the one person who had never let me down. The morning after my birthday, I woke up in Grandma's guest room feeling more rested than I had in years. I was helping Grandma with the dishes when there was a knock at the door. To my utter shock, it was Mom. "Elizabeth, Beth," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Can we talk?" I stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Grandma gently squeezed my shoulder and nodded, so I stepped aside to let Mom in. She looked different, smaller somehow, and definitely nervous. In her hands, she clutched a gift-wrapped package. "I'm sorry about yesterday," Mom began, her eyes darting around the room. "I don't know what came over me. Here, I got you a birthday present." I took the package mechanically, too stunned to speak. "Please, Elizabeth," Mom continued, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Come home. We can work this out." Grandma, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "I'm glad you've come to your senses, dear," she said to Mom, her tone firm but not unkind. "But I'm afraid it's too late to change things now." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment, the front door opened. An elderly couple stepped in, and I watched in confusion as all the color drained from Mom's face. "Hello, Elizabeth," the woman said warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Happy belated birthday. The man beside her smiled and added, We've been waiting a long time to meet you, sweetheart. Grandma stepped forward. Elizabeth, these are your paternal grandparents. I asked them to come. My mind was reeling. The grandparents I'd never known, the ones Mom had always said wanted nothing to do with me, were here. And Grandma had invited them. They enveloped me in a warm hug, and I found myself instinctively relaxing into their embrace. We have a lot to tell you, Elizabeth, my grandfather said, his voice gentle but firm, starting with the truth about your home. Over the next hour, they unraveled a story that left me speechless. The house I'd grown up in, the one I'd been unceremoniously kicked out of just yesterday, actually belonged to me. It had been left to me by my father and put in my name by my paternal grandparents after his death. Your mother was allowed to live there with you, my grandmother explained, shooting a pointed look at Mom, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. But now that you're 18, it's your decision who lives there. I sat there trying to process this bombshell. All those years of feeling like a burden, of being told I should be grateful for a roof over my head. And the house had been mine all along. I own the house. I stammered, my mind struggling to grasp this new reality. My grandparents nodded while Mom sat silent. As I sat there, still reeling from the revelation about the house, my paternal grandmother gently took my hand. There's more, Elizabeth, she said, her voice soft but firm. My grandfather nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. We've been sending your mother a monthly allowance ever since your father passed away, he explained. It was meant to cover your expenses, clothes, school supplies, anything you needed. I felt my jaw drop. All those years of wearing hand-me-downs, of being told we couldn't afford new clothes or school trips, had it all been a lie. We wanted to be part of your life, to help raise you, my grandmother continued. But your mother, she was against it. I glanced at Mom, who was standing in the corner of the room, her face a mask of discomfort and shame. We didn't want to cause any trouble, my grandfather added, so we kept in touch through your grandmother here. She's been sending us photos and updates about you all these years. Grandma nodded, squeezing my shoulder supportively. And that's not all, my grandmother said. We've been saving for your college education. We gave the money to your mother to set aside for you. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. College money? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned to Mom, who was now visibly squirming. You told me there was no money for college. You told me I was on my own. The room fell silent, all eyes on my mother. She opened and closed her mouth several times, no words coming out. Finally, Grandma spoke, her voice characteristically stern. Tell her the truth, Amanda. You owe her that much. Mom's face cycled through various shades of red and white. Wait, she stammered, then took a deep breath. Frank and I, we spent the money. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I was in a surreal dream, or rather a nightmare. You did what? My paternal grandmother's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. Mom flinched. We needed it. We bought a car, she finally blurted out. A car, my grandfather repeated incredulously. A luxury car, Mom added, as if that somehow made it better. We needed it. Frank's job, appearances are important, you know. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the level of selfishness and deceit. All those years of scrimping and saving, of being told I was a burden, and they had been living it up with money meant for me. The room fell into a stunned silence as the magnitude of my mother's betrayal sank in. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, hot and fierce. You're a fraud. I spat out, my voice trembling with rage. You kicked me out of my own house after robbing me blind for years. Mom's eyes widened, and she held up her hands defensively. No, Elizabeth. You've misunderstood everything. She pleaded. I was going to surprise you for your birthday. I was going to tell you about the house and the money. I couldn't help it. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you surprised me all right, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Kicking me out on my 18th birthday was quite the surprise. Congratulations, Mom. Mission accomplished. My paternal grandfather stepped forward, his face stern. Amanda, he said, addressing my mother, you need to return the money for Elizabeth's education immediately. Mom's face contorted with anger. I'm not giving anything back, she shrieked. Do you have any idea how hard it's been raising her on my own? That money is compensation for everything I've done. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Everything you've done, I echoed incredulously. You mean neglecting me, making me feel like a burden, and stealing from me? Mom turned to me, her eyes wild. Elizabeth, stop this nonsense and come home right now, she demanded. Something inside me snapped. It's my house, and I want you and Frank out now. Mom's face crumpled, and she pointed at her stomach. But I'm pregnant, she whimpered. You can't throw us out. Where will we go? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, just a profound weariness. I could see that while her pregnancy might be real, her tears were just another manipulation tactic. That's not my problem, I said quietly. You should have thought about that before you stole my future. Grandma stepped forward and put her arm around my shoulders. I think it's time for you to leave, Amanda, she said firmly. You've done enough damage. As Mom continued to sob and plead, my paternal grandparents exchanged a look. We'll be pursuing legal action to recover the stolen funds, my grandfather stated, and we'll be helping Elizabeth secure her property. I watched as my mother's face cycled through shock, anger, and fear. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Not the loving mother I'd always longed for, but a selfish, manipulative woman who had put her own desires above her child's well-being. The weeks following that fateful confrontation were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and emotional upheaval. With the support of my grandparents, both sets of them, I found the strength to stand up for myself and pursue justice. We filed multiple lawsuits, one for compensation for moral damages, another for the misuse of the monthly allowance my paternal grandparents had been sending, and a third for the return of my college fund. Each document I signed felt like a step towards reclaiming my life. The most difficult lawsuit to file was the eviction notice for Mom and Frank. Despite everything, a small part of me still hesitated. Was I doing the right thing? You're not leaving them homeless, Elizabeth, Grandma reassured me, sensing my doubt. They are adults who made their choices. Now it's time for you to make yours. Too soon, the day of the court hearing approached. With a knotted stomach, I sat in the courtroom while the judge went over our case. I got angry looks from Mom and Frank, who were seated on the opposite side. I held my breath as the judge started to speak. In the case of Elizabeth versus Amanda and Frank Thompson, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Elizabeth. There was an inexplicable sense of relief that enveloped me. The judge went on to explain the court's ruling, which included paying Mom and Frank out of my house, returning my education fund, paying back all assets that were misappropriated, and providing full recompense for moral damages. I watched as Mom's angry face twisted. With an infuriated scream, she leaped to her feet, while Frank sat still next to her. Mom's last words echoed in my mind as the bailiffs led them away. You ungrateful brat. After all of our assistance to you. Those cruel comments had lost their power over me. There was no amount of guilt-tripping that could erase the fact that I knew it. The next several weeks were packed with activities. After Mom and Frank moved out, the house was in a mess. In a way, clearing the clutter and rearranging things to remove any reminders of them from my life was cathartic. I was able to enroll at a prominent institution in a different city with the money I had just retrieved. I had not wept so much in years as I did on the day I received my admission letter. As I got ready for college, I couldn't help but think back on the rapid changes that had occurred in my life. I'd gone from a gaslit, abandoned youngster to a homeowner and college student with a loving family in a matter of months. My last day was a sad day. I gave Grandma a firm embrace and promised to talk to her regularly. She reassured me, "Don't worry about the house. I'll keep an eye on things while you're gone." My new university was reached by car, and my paternal grandparents assisted me in settling into my dorm. Upon bidding farewell, my grandfather placed a tiny package in my grasp. "If it was your father's," he said, "we thought you should have it." There was a lovely watch inside that read, "Time reveals truth." How appropriate, I thought, in light of the past several days. I was prospering at college, having left behind the continual stress and negativity of my previous life. I found a confidence I never thought I had and a zest for learning. I want to help other kids who could be in similar situations like mine, so I made new acquaintances, joined groups, and even began working at a small youth center. I was in constant communication with both sets of grandparents during the whole ordeal. I started to look forward to my weekend trips home, which were always warm, funny, and full of affection from my real family. Regarding Mom and Frank, rumors had it that they had relocated to a different state. Mother had delivered a baby girl. Though I knew it wasn't my duty, I experienced a little pang of sorrow for my half-sister and hoped she wouldn't go through what I had. I now had to live my own life.